All right. Good afternoon, everyone out there tuning in to Safe Harbors. Welcome to the return of Insta Live on Fry. We're back after our prolonged Christmas break. January is Stalking Awareness Month, so we're going to do a little talking about stalking today. I'm also going to introduce myself. So I'm Rebecca Godwin. I'm the Youth Services Coordinator here at Safe Harbors. So I run a lot of our school-based programming. So in our 3-county area, we have 16 school districts and 5 colleges. Some of you might recognize me from being on your college or school campuses. This year, you're going to meet all the members of our youth team, and you will meet us month by month. So you have me for January, and we're going to talk a little bit about stalking. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the origin of stalking laws. If you're following our Facebook or our Instagram, either Instagram, so I'm broadcasting here, doing the live on our regular Safe Harbors one. We also have our Young Voices one. I posted a picture earlier today of an actress named Rebecca Schaefer. And because of her is why we have stalking laws in our country. So question for those of you watching, when, in what year, was the first anti-stalking law passed in the United States? So in the entire history of the United States, what year was the very first anti-stalking law passed? Let me give you a second, and then I'm going to tell you. 1990. Not too long ago, 1990 was the very first stalking law passed, and it was passed in the state of California. And it was very, very strict in its definition of stalking. And it was also a little wobbly. It was a law they refer to as a wobbler because it gave law enforcement and DA's office the option of either calling it a misdemeanor or a felony, depending on the sort of circumstances that they discovered. And it specifically stated that there had to be a credible threat to the person or their family's safety. Now, in the ensuing decades, since 1990, we've expanded the definition of stalking to include unwanted attention, unwanted presence, spying, being where you're not supposed to be. Very specifically, the first anti-stalking law that was passed in the state of California in 1990 said there had to be a credible threat to safety. You had to prove a credible threat to yours or your family's safety based on the stalker's behavior. So, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happened to Rebecca Schaefer. So Rebecca Schaefer was murdered in July of 1989. And I remember when I was younger, it's a famous person named Rebecca. So I remember this very clearly because it seemed super important at the time. So she was an actress who had been on a TV show called My Sister Sam and then was in a few movies. And she was in the process of auditioning for Godfather 3 when she died. So Rebecca Schaefer had been a model and an actress and was 21 years old on the day she died. She'd been acting for about 5 years. So what happened was there was a man who was a fan of hers who sent her letters, one of which she replied to. So she is a young actress. Replied to many of her fan letters. Thank you for writing. Here's my autograph. Nothing more than that. But this was enough for this young man in his mind to really believe he had a relationship with her. He lived in, I believe, Texas. She lived in Los Angeles, California, and he traveled to California 3 times trying to meet her. The third and final time being the time that he murdered her. So there was about a 2-year period of time where this young man became obsessed with her. And for a point of reference, on the day she died, she was 21. On the day he murdered her, he was only 19 and had been struggling with his mental health for most of his life. So he wrote her a fan letter. She wrote back, thanks for being a fan. He decided he was in a relationship with her and he loved her. On his first 2 trips to California, he tried showing up at the Warner Brothers studio where she was working. And he brought both like candy and teddy bears and flowers and a knife. Was turned away by the guards at the studio and not allowed in. A second instance of this happened again, where he traveled from his home state of Texas to California in attempts to meet her. by going to the studio where she was recording her TV show, was not allowed to meet her because that's how security works. Then this troubled young man heard a story of an actress who a few years prior had been stabbed. So there was a woman named Teresa Saldano, who was an actress, and in the late 80s, early 90s, a fan who was obsessed with her stabbed her. She lived. But the story, when that happened, how the person found her was part of the news story. And how the person who had murdered or had stabbed, she lived, Teresa Saldano found her is he hired a PI to get her address. So this was a news story that this troubled young man who was obsessed with Rebecca Schaefer found out about. He himself hired a private investigator to get her driver's license. He paid a private investigator $250. That private investigator simply went to the DMV and filled out a form and paid a couple dollars and requested her address, because at that time, that was a perfectly legal thing that people could do. So this private investigator took $250, got Rebecca Schaefer's address, gave it to the man who hired her. He had struggled with mental health, had tried to buy a gun on his own and had been turned away at the store. So he enlisted his brother for his brother's help in buying a gun. His brother said, yeah, sure, maybe you should keep it at my house. We can do some target practice together. And he's like, no, I'll keep it at my house, but we'll shoot together. So the brother bought his 19-year-old mentally ill younger brother a gun. He then bought a bus ticket to Los Angeles with the address of this woman and a gun, walked up and down her street showing her photo to her neighbors, asking to verify that she did live there. Her name was, she lived in an apartment. Her name was on her doorbell, because she wasn't super famous. It didn't occur to her to not do that. And she was waiting for delivery of a script because she was auditioning for Godfather 3. And he rang her doorbell. She came to the door. After a short conversation, he shot her. She died 30 minutes later at the hospital. He was able to legally obtain her address through this private investigator. So I said in 1990, the very first anti-stalking laws were passed directly as a result of what happened to both Rebecca Schaefer the year before and what had happened to Teresa Saldano a few years before that, because they were both in California. So 1990 is when the first state passed an anti-stalking law. When do you think the federal government passed its first anti-stalking law? I'll give you a moment to think. So the answer is 1996. So it took about 6 years from the very first state passing a law to the federal government passing the interstate stalking punishment law, which very specifically was you can't travel across state lines to stalk someone, and you get punished if you do that. So that is, by 1996, 49 states and the District of Columbia had passed anti-stalking laws. So from the very first law in California in 1990 to 1996, 49 states and the District of Columbia. Now all 50 states have. I honestly do not know which one was last. I'm not going to drive myself crazy trying to figure that out because it's sad news. But the fact that all 50 states and the District of Columbia have laws now is what's great. Now, in 1989, Rebecca Schaefer was murdered because someone was able to obtain her driver's license at the DMV. It took to 1994 for the federal government to make a law making that illegal. So it was the murder of Rebecca Schaefer, the stabbing of Teresa Saldano, and the use of the DMV by anti-abortion activists to target abortion doctors collectively that made that a federal law. So a lawmaker was able at the federal level to pass a law. It took a couple years, but it's the Driver's Privacy Protection Act of 1994. So it is no longer legal for someone to walk to the DMV and fill out a form and hand them $10 and get your home address. Yay! Now, one more thing is we're talking about the development of anti-stalking laws. Most of the initial laws were instigated by things like celebrities being stalked. It took until 1995 for both psychologists and lawmakers and just general law enforcement people to start referring to the behavior of a regular person after a breakup as stalking. Like, that wasn't labeled stalking until 1995 at the earliest. It was just considered, harassment or obsessive behavior when someone after a breakup behaved in a manner we now call stalking. And remember, I mentioned before, initially anti-stalking laws very specifically said it had to be a credible threat to your or your family's safety. Now, when we look at anti-stalking laws, they include a wide variety of behaviors, including showing up unexpectedly, showing up where you're not wanted, leaving gifts, spying. Cyber stalking laws have passed. That's a whole other thing, because there wasn't so much internet in 1994 when the first laws were passed. So that is a little bit about the history and the origin of anti-stalking laws in our country. I encourage you to scroll in whichever direction to get you pictures of Rebecca Schaefer, the young woman whose murder was the inspiration for the laws that we have. Thanks for joining us. So every Friday at 2, you will meet myself or one of the other members of youth staff here on Instagram. This will also be saved on our YouTube. So if you want to tell one of your friends about our Insta Live, it's available for viewing on our YouTube page, which I will put a link, but it's just a safe harbor. So the Finger Lakes, if you want to search, everything there is public. All our Insta Lives from last year are saved there. I'm also going to be uploading to our YouTube Autumn and Melissa, because in addition to being Stalking Awareness Month, it's also Anti-Trafficking Month. It's Trafficking Awareness Month. And Melissa Gilbert and Autumn from Safe Harbors were on the radio the other day, so we're going to upload their radio interview to our YouTube page as well, so you can check that out. So thank you for joining me. We will see you every Friday at or near 2. Thanks. Have a great day. Have a great